Trade season is upon us. Are the Milwaukee Bucks next? Do they have anything cooking in advance of the draft? We dig into it next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Frank Madden. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day each and every day. And we are now here, the day of round one of the NBA draft. And we have already seen quite a bit of change throughout the league, Frank. One of the things you and I were talking about before we started recording, and Camille and I mentioned it last week or earlier this week on the show, some of the stuff that you see tossed around and mentioning the Dunked On mock off season where they had the Bucks reacquiring Jrue Holiday. We have since seen Jrue Holiday traded to the Portland Trail Blazers, and one of two moves that the Boston Celtics have made now, shedding off both Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis. But, you know, you're looking around at the Eastern Conference, and granted, the big caveat here is, okay, can you keep basically most of the group together, or are there any surface level upgrades that you can make? But all of a sudden we go from Bucks might be a 6 seed, a play-in tournament team, to, okay, if things break right for them, could they be a top 4 seed once again?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think we were talking about right here before we got on, Boston. We knew obviously Boston was going to take a step back this coming season because of the Tatum injury. And obviously, ever since Jaylen Brown signed his massive contract, everybody's been assuming that there would be, they would have to pay the piper in terms of the impact of, and it's not, people talk about the second apron, but like, it's not just the second apron, but it's really the tax and how punitive the tax is now with the repeater and everything. Like, it is just like astronomically expensive to retain a team with, as many high paid guys as the Celtics had. And so, to see them have to basically punt 2 of those guys. And I will say this, like, I think Anthony Simons is an interesting guy. He's still relatively young. I thought the Jrue part of that trade, the kind of the Jrue part of the transactions, getting 2 second rounders and Simons for Jrue, especially given his contract, I thought was actually really good business by the Celtics. Not necessarily one that's going to help to win them more games next year or in the future, just given Simons, I think he's an expiring contract as well. So you're going to have to, if he plays really well, you're going to have to figure out kind of what you do with his contract. But with Porzingis, the fact that he's got a pretty friendly deal, granted, he's got obviously an injury history and he'll need to be extended. But, him basically be traded for what, George Niang in a second, I think, that was much more of just a salary shed move. It's just kind of eye-opening, right? Just looking around to kind of what the tax is doing to these teams, right? Like your window is like 2-3 years before you just get obliterated by, these massive tax bills. And, even the Boston Celtics, the second most valuable team in the NBA, according to recent transactions, obviously it decided we're not paying $400 or $500 million for our roster next year. And that plus obviously, and I haven't been on since the finals, but the Halliburton injury to Indiana, right? Absent injuries, I think you would have come into this offseason saying, well, certainly Boston's going to be there near the top. Indiana, of course,
New York.
Maybe they'll finally be a great regular season team, even though they haven't been that before. New York, yeah, even with the coaching turnover, right? But New York should be.
And even before the Desmond Bane trade, I think you could rationally look at it and say, well, the Magic kind of had a year from hell with injuries. They'll be healthier. They're going to be in that mix too, in front of the Bucks.
Yeah, and Cleveland, of course, right?
Yeah.
Cleveland being the team that had the best record in the conference and, flamed out amidst some bad luck and injuries, obviously, in their matchup with the Pacers. But yeah, I mean, I think I would have probably said, Cleveland, Boston, maybe Indiana becomes a great regular season team, and then New York, maybe 4th, and then Orlando, I think, as you said, like, even with Franz and Paolo missing a lot of time, like, as long as Suggs was there, they seemed to just keep cranking out wins, winning games. And then when Suggs got hurt, kind of the wheels came off for their season. But that 5, I think you could have very credibly said, especially a Bucks team without Dame, barring some massive change this summer, that those 5 teams I would have said, yeah, I think those teams are going to be ahead of the Bucks, especially, with, again, we can talk about Doc. To be honest, like, the Doc discussion, and I think 2 things can be true. I think Doc can be kind of a mediocre coach who's not really elevating the Bucks much beyond where they are. But I think he can also be a guy that, like, again, if he's mediocre, that means he's not like he's the worst coach in the league, and anybody that you hire is immediately going to unlock some next level of this team, right? I mean, look at the recent history of the Bucks with coaches. Like, at some point, like, your roster and your situation, like, you have to kind of look in the mirror, obviously, a bit. So, but, absent some magical thing happening there where, a new coach comes in and unlocks some different style of play, which obviously would also have to be kind of partnered with some roster turnover and things like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think those 5 teams would have been there, but now with Boston losing Tatum, trading away, 2 of their top 4 or 5 guys, legitimate all-star players, starters on their championship team. I have no idea what to expect of Boston. I'm fascinated to see how good the Celtics are next year. I don't think the Celtics are going to be bad. I think the infrastructure is still there, but, like, certainly this is going to be a major test of that infrastructure. How much of, like, HGH can they pump into Al Horford's body if they re-sign him? Because he's, I guess, the starting center, or Frank Cornette or whatever. Sorry, Cornette. I always say Frank Cornette.
Well, they might need Frank too if Al Horford.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, and then Indiana. I mean, 82 games, as good as CJ McConnell is, like, I don't know what they must. I assume they're going to have to spend some money to fortify their guard depth, unless they're just going to say, we'll just roll with Nembhard and McConnell as their starting guards and just kind of figure it out. But yeah, so I mean, it's just kind of, I don't know, it feels like it's a little bit of like last team standing here, with kind of Cleveland, New York, and I guess Orlando now are sort of the 3 teams that I would feel best about. And then the Bucks are just sort of one of the wild card teams in this sort of jumble of teams that are kind of trying to make the case for being maybe, one of those top 4 seeds. And obviously Atlanta made a good case today with adding Porzingis. They're getting Jalen Johnson back. Could this finally be the year where the Hawks, rekindle some of the magic they had 4 years ago against the Bucks? Well, not so much against the Bucks, but against the Sixers, and I forget who they beat in the first round. But yeah, so just, I don't know. Yeah, the East is just fascinating, and I think
Knicks, right?
Yeah, Knicks are the 3rd team. I think the Cavs, Knicks.
Who they beat in the first round, the Knicks.
Sorry. Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, F. Trae Young, of course, at the Garden. But yeah, so I think I guess those would be my 3 teams. The Knicks don't have a coach yet, so we'll see. When they're done trying to get an interview with every last head coach in the NBA currently. But yeah, this is, like, again, I think if you're looking at it through the lens of things that make it more likely that obviously Giannis is content to just keep going, and I know that I'd say most Bucks fans have sort of like locked in the idea that Giannis, is going to be around for at least the start of the regular season and whatever. But I don't know. I mean, look, I'll never attempt to put myself in Giannis's shoes and assume that he's just perpetually happy here. So I think if good things happen for the team over the summer, that will make me feel better, and it'll make me feel better about Giannis wanting to stay. So, but I think in general, like, the kind of chaos in the East, certainly if you're Giannis, and even if you have an inkling of maybe thinking you would be better served being elsewhere, you're certainly not wanting to move out of the East right now. That's for sure. And obviously, I think given the fact that he would prefer to make it work in Milwaukee, we know that's always the case. This is certainly a set of circumstances that, if Giannis, I'm sure he's feeling like, okay, like, if we can do well this summer, then, I'll bet on myself come fall.
There's some other interesting things about the Indiana Pacers and how that could impact the Bucks and other teams here in this offseason. And as we mentioned, as this show comes out, it is day one of the NBA draft. The Bucks are not scheduled to pick today, but is there any possibility that could change? We'll get into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks. This next segment of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had an urgent need, maybe for a plumber or another service provider. If you called someone and they didn't answer, you probably didn't wait. You moved on to the next name on the list. So that's why you need Open Phone. They are the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or computer. They let you manage business calls and texts from a single app. They have a shared inbox feature that can be a game changer, allowing your team to jump into any conversation instantly without missing a beat. And their AI agent handles after-hours calls, answers common questions, and captures leads so you never miss a customer. Open Phone is offering our listeners 20% off for your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That's openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. So I suppose to start with free agency, and teams, of course, at this point are free to negotiate with their free agents. The Pacers are interesting because, I mean, we all kind of assumed Miles Turner's going back there. And even, the day of Game 7, there was that report that Herb Simon's finally willing to go into the tax and they'll pay $30 million or so to keep Miles Turner. I still don't think this changes things, but that injury to Halliburton and the fact that they reacquired, great timing, their first-round pick next year, a couple of days prior to that injury, it does at least give you the opportunity to say, well, is there a walkaway number? Like, we were going to keep the band together because, as we both said, I think the windows are 3 years realistically now. So let's keep that group and we can figure it out later. But if this prompts the Pacers to say, you know what, we're probably going to have a bit of a gap year next year, $30 million for Miles Turner, didn't have a great finals, has some of those similar types of play sets or skill sets as Brook Lopez, maybe we just walk away and move on to something else and regroup for 2 years from now. If that happens, somebody else signs him, which we didn't anticipate, which takes even more money away from teams to be able to spend. And that's where, for the Bucks, names like Gary Trent Jr. and especially in that case, Bobby Portis become interesting, because I do wonder what the market is for a guy like Bobby Portis, and that there's certainly value there. And I think he has proven himself to be very durable. And even last year, I don't think we faced quite as many of the questions on the defensive side of the floor. You can make a strong case. He's underpaid for the value and productivity he gives you. I don't know what the team is and where the offer is that's going to be more than the non-taxpayer for him.
Yeah, I mean, if he's underpaid, it's by the small bit of daylight between what he's making, what he would make next year, which is 13 point something, and the non-tax mid-level, which is like 14.1, I think, if I remember correctly. So, yeah. So I think he's like pretty fairly paid. As we've said on the podcast before, contracts tend to sort of gravitate towards the exception numbers. So, the majority of deals are going to be either minimums, things close to the taxpayer mid-level, or things close to the non-tax mid-level. That's where things kind of tend to bunch. And certainly they don't bunch at numbers slightly over that. So the idea that, Bobby would get $15 million per year starting salary just doesn't make a lot of sense, because there's only a handful of teams that even have cap space. So, are the Brooklyn Nets or Detroit Pistons going to, like the Pistons, it's like they would have to rearrange stuff to make him their only offseason like signing, or something like that. Like, it just doesn't really seem very plausible that he would be the guy that really any team would target in that respect. Some of the Warriors podcasters, Sam Esfandiari, has been, I'd say, half joking, half seriously, talking about going after Bobby in a sign and trade over the last week or two. So we've heard the Warriors kind of been thrown around as a potential Brook Lopez suitor as well. So yeah, I mean, those are the sort of teams, but they're not teams that just can like willy-nilly throw out like, here's, 4 years, like $60 million max, mid-level contracts. So we'll see. I mean, the first question is just obviously like, the option decision, and, not surprisingly, Pat Connaughton opted into his $9.4 million option, which, seemed like kind of a no-brainer. And if for the Bucks, but I mean, Justin, if you can get a guy who put up, 43 and 12,
average
or whatever,
43 as a starter,
that's a bargain. $9 million. Send this guy, send that YouTube highlight reel around. John Horst, start just like messaging your GM friends about that one. But so that one was not surprising. The Bobby one certainly is much more interesting and debatable as to whether or not he'll opt in or not. But as is usually the case, your agent canvasses the market to make sure there's a landing place for you, or at least teams are interested, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to be the very first place, but you want to have some sense of, your best case scenario is that the team that you're with, you can negotiate some sort of extension, right? He's been extension eligible. So it's not like there's been some reason why he couldn't have extended before, today or next week or whatever. So obviously now, it became a matter of probably them trying to figure out from Bobby's side, what are the other options that they can use, even if he wants to stay, that they can use as leverage. Because if you're the Bucks, on some level, like him opting in, like maybe your preferred option, right? Like, especially with all the uncertainty around the team, I think he makes a lot of sense on a team constructed around Giannis, who you want floor stretching bigs with him. Giannis, I think, also defensively complements him pretty well, just given what Giannis can do defensively. So yeah, I mean, I think on him, honestly, him not opting in would not be a bad outcome. I think if you're the Bucks, like if you could, certainly you could see them doing the tactic of saying, hey, we'll give you another year or two if you take a lower number. But again, is Bobby willing to do that? I think from everything we've seen and heard, he thinks he's, been underpaid. He thinks he deserves a bigger number than that 13 and change that he's making this coming season. But, again, like, okay, like he's not sort of the level of player that typically gets the big overpay as a thank you, right? Like, it's one thing if you give Kobe the max contract when he's wearing down. But, with guys who are, those high quality role players, that's where you really get burned if you decide to be generous and give them, a bunch of years at dollars that the market really wouldn't justify. So yeah, I agree. I think Bobby's like the most, probably the most interesting guy in some ways. Although I would say, I think Brook is actually probably the guy I'm most interested in, because I think Brook is most likely to have viable offers from other teams at a number that the Bucks would probably like prefer not to pay him, right? Like if Brook can get 10 to 12 million elsewhere, I don't know that the Bucks would want to match that, just because of what it would mean for bringing back some of their other younger guys and staying under the tax, which again I think is probably a safe bet that the Bucks' preference is to stay under the tax. And they don't have to do that going into the season. Obviously the tax is dependent on where you are at the end of the season. So you could always make a move later. You could always sort of, if things aren't going your way, do a tax dump move later or something like that. Or, what I've mentioned as well is if you get to the end of the summer and, you're a few $1 million over, kind of the ripcord option is you could also stretch Pat Connaughton, which would save $6 million this coming season, which I'm sure they would not. I would rather not do that, in part just because that expiring contract also has some usefulness in terms of trades. But yeah, I think it's going to be, an interesting few days here, even though I don't really have a strong opinion about what they're going to do in the draft. We can talk about kind of our expectations there, but obviously they have limited flexibility given they only have the 47th pick in the draft.
Yeah, the draft is the next segue here, and you mentioned just a second round pick midway through the draft, but we've seen more and more teams stockpile first round picks. So, is there a chance or possibility to get into the first round? And also, speaking of draft picks, the most valuable one, that 2031 for the Bucks, what is the offer in which you would put that on the table? We'll get Frank's thoughts on that coming up next. Well, there's nothing like stepping into your own outdoor space and feeling like you've escaped to a personal oasis. If you're wanting to update your patio this season, Wayfair has made it so easy to turn that space into a place that feels like yours, comfortable, stylish, and ready for summer. Wayfair has everything you need to level up your outdoor space, whether it be conversation sets, outdoor bars, fire pits, hot tubs, gazebos, and the perfect string lights to set the vibe. It gives you that backyard resort feel without the resort price tag. You can look at things like a new outdoor dining set or some modern lounge chairs to completely transform your patio. Whether your style is clean and modern or something else, you'll love being able to filter down to find exactly what that style fit is and at your budget. Don't wait. Make your outdoor space your dream oasis today with Wayfair and enjoy it all summer long. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop a huge outdoor selection. That is wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. So the draft tonight, I guess I do want to get to what you just mentioned and what to expect, if anything, from the Bucks, but that 2031 first round pick is, I don't know, would you say the most valuable asset that's out there right now, given, even if Giannis is still here by the time 2030, 2031 rolls around, he's going to be 35, 36 and, probably reduced from where he was. So that's going to be an incredibly valuable thing that, any team that can play the long game. So yeah, we'll take that, and we'll take on a bad contract if we get that, because we think you're going to be pretty bad. Camille and I have talked about this before, and I understand the camp that says, look, as long as number 34 is here, everything is on the table. Nothing is untouchable. You're willing to do anything to make this team better. For the most part, I agree with that. I think where I struggle is we've seen a handful of people kick around. Bucks would include a 2031 and their 2032 pick swap and this contract to get this player. And because of the contracts you're giving up, it's always like a marginal type of maybe starter level player, but that's about it. For me, I've always felt like if you are going to trade the 2031, it can't just be, I don't even want to give a player name, but it can't just be like, yeah, he's okay. He's better than Kyle Kuzma, basically. Like, it has to be something that you feel like this guy's really good and this guy's going to be here for the next, 4 or 5 years. We're going to extend him and ride out that era of Giannis with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think for better or worse, I imagine the ceiling of what that pick could get you is guys that are, those starters who are intriguing.
So, like, case
really
in point,
not like they're not like all-star. You're not getting. I don't think you're getting an all-star with Kyle Kuzma, that pick, and some ancillary stuff.
Like the name that's brought up the most, Cam Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, so I would say this as far as like, is it the most appealing, valuable pick that is generally in play in the marketplace? You hinted at it, right? For teams that can afford to sort of think that far out, which is not every team, right? There's teams that would discount the fact that pick is so far out. There's obviously teams that, have, and GMs who have shorter leashes who are probably never going to see the light of making that pick or really being able to use that pick. So, I think it would have a lot of value to teams that have a longer time horizon, less value to teams that don't have that benefit. And so then that obviously sort of narrows the number of teams. So that
limits it to just the Thunder, basically.
Well, I mean, more than that, but I think
Well,
Cam Johnson's an interesting, because I think Cam Johnson's a good example, because like you could see the Nets being a team. The Nets could go two different ways, right? The Nets could use all this flexibility they have. They have 5 first-round picks now on Wednesday night. They could use that to try to package and get people, use that cap space to try to actually add, and it'd probably be more from like absorbing contracts than it is from, going out and signing necessarily guys. But, notable that they absorbed Terrence Mann, but, could they have been the landing place for Kristaps Porzingis or Jrue Holiday or something like that? Like, presumably if they wanted to, but they didn't want to. So that perhaps speaks to the fact that, maybe they're not trying to be particularly good. And obviously that means that if you get Cam Johnson and, you could move Cam Johnson for the 2031 Bucks pick and maybe, something else plus Kuzma, maybe that'd be something they'd be interested in. But yeah, I think Cam Johnson, the idea we talked about, like Colin Sexton and / John Collins from the Jazz, I don't know the exact circumstances of what Toronto would be looking for in like an RJ Barrett deal, but he feels like maybe he's like the, another like version of that sort of player where it's like, in your most optimistic late August, sort of haze, like the fan message boards could say like, oh, if this happens and this happens, like that guy, maybe there's an all-star appearance in it for some guy. But, if we're all sober and under the clear light of day, we probably would say, yeah, that guy's like probably like a 4th banana. And if you're asking him to be your 3rd best player, let alone something more than that, you're probably not going to, have title aspirations if you're expecting that much out of the guy. And I like Cam Johnson, again, like if you told me the Bucks traded the 2031 and Kyle Kuzma for Cam Johnson, I would probably say like, well, really mortgaging the last assets for, to appease Giannis. And, like a guy like that, he can play the 3, small 4, like would fit actually quite well, the shooting, etc. So you could see it actually working out pretty well here over the next couple of years. But, he's also 29. He's kind of like Kuzma, sort of sneaky, not young. Both guys came out of the draft sort of older. And yeah, you can kind of go down the list, right? A guy like Barrett. Barrett put up like 21, 6 and 5 last year, like really good numbers. Then you kind of look at him and it's like really not that efficient, not a high volume 3-point shooter, like 35%, kind of had somebody had to score points and do stuff on a bad Raptors team kind of benefit last year. So what does he look like, playing with Giannis as the guy that, that there's actually pressure to win and play winning basketball? Yeah, like I don't think he's going to be the next Chris Middleton, but maybe there's a version of him that, could be something kind of like that in an absolute best case scenario. So yeah, it's kind of hard. Or I think like the Jazz scenario, right? Like I think the problem with like Collins and Sexton, I think you literally have to put Damian to make the math work on that. Yeah. But like, Sexton obviously is a guy that we've talked about for years, going back to pre-Dame. Sexton is like the Jrue Holiday complement, which I think would have been a good fit in a lot of ways. But again, it's like, is Colin Sexton going to win you basketball games in April and meaningfully move the needle here? I don't know. And again, like him being marooned in Utah, like hasn't been very instructive as far as like whether he's a winning basketball player or not. So I think those are like there's probably some guys that we're missing, but those are the sorts of players that, we're talking about. And yeah, this is the thing, like everybody that I think you could get, there's going to be real questions about, man, did you really want to use that pick on that guy? But I think that the thing that's so interesting to me, and I think I've probably said it before, is between Giannis and John Horst. That would be if I'm Giannis, the first question I'd ask about my summer is, what would you give up that pick for? Yeah. Like I don't give a shit about 2031. Like you got me, You know, I'm the best player in the world. What are you gonna do with that pick to help me win you another championship? And yeah, I mean, good question for John Hort. I'm sure he wouldn't give a, straight answer for it.
Here's a list of guys.
But like I would love to know what John Horst secretly would be willing to do with that pick. I'm sure there's some scenario where he would move it in the short term, but on some level, there's also, I think, an argument for if especially if you think there's a chance that Giannis's interest in staying could, let's say, over the next year. I think there's also an argument for saying, like, don't be too quick to use that pick now. Ideally, you kind of use the gap year, quote unquote gap year, excuse to maybe keep Giannis happy and not feeling like we have to do something. And then a year from now, you figure out, like, okay, is Giannis actually going to stay around? Would he extend? And then you make a decision about potentially using that pick rather than doing it right now. But again, the flip side is, like, you have finite years of Giannis's prime left. You could argue sort of waiting a year is just like, you're getting really cute with, the best player in the history of the franchise and his kind of best years.
Well, and I guess the last thing that I would bring up before we just get to the Bucks draft is the other thing about the 2031 pick that I do find interesting for the Bucks and maybe puts them in a little different spot than some other teams in terms of, like, could be even more valuable is teams' willingness to say, yeah, we'll take that because, number one, what we just went over, who knows where the Bucks are in 2030, but also, especially since there has been smoke around it, maybe not verified smoke, but they're one of the teams that comes up, Brooklyn. If you have an interest in Giannis and you say, this is another thing of, okay, we have that Bucks pick. So when they look to trade Giannis, do you want your pick back? Here's our starting point.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, like, I sort of implicit in, I think, our discussions here has been the idea of trading that as an unprotected pick, right? Which is how you maximize the value of the pick, is by saying, like, if it's number one, you keep it.
It's
no protections. Obviously the Bucks don't have to do that, right? The Bucks could put top 1, top 3, lottery, whatever. They could put protections on the pick. It would just limit the upside. And the flip side too is if you put, like, protections on it and then it, pushes to 2032, if not, then that also limits what you could do as far as swapping 2032. Yeah, exactly. So, if there was a protection that pushed to 2032, then you couldn't sell the swap. Well, I mean, there's things you could do, but, like, it would be much harder to monetize 2032 as a potential swap, which that's another thing they could do as well. Like, they could obviously trade 2031 as a swap, or they could trade 2032 as an unprotected pick. Like, but they can't do both as just pure picks, right? Because of the Stepien rule and the consecutive first rounders rule. So, yeah, it's and I mean, the other thing too, last year Phoenix sort of de-aggregated I think it was one of their, like,
their
future
2031. Yeah,
one of their picks. Did they get like 3 bad first rounders basically for it?
One is this year, the 29th pick.
Which, I mean, the two arguments in favor of that is that you just have more, it's basically like getting change at the store. So instead of having $100 bill, you've got, 4 20s and 2 10s or whatever, and you can.
I don't know if it's 4 20s and 2 10s, but you may have got 3 20s and a couple 5s.
That's true. That's true. That's definitely true, Justin. So I think the argument would be, if you get that change, you can, like, make smaller deals where now you've sort of disaggregated the value, and you can make more kind of like marginal deals. You don't have to put this big swing of a pick into a trade. And the other argument too is, like, if you pull up those, obviously if you wanted to use those picks, well, now they're going to get to use one of those picks this year, which is not a very good pick. And as we said too, some teams may not really, like, even be in the market for a pick that far out. So if you have multiple picks that are coming sooner, then some teams would view that as equal or even better value, right? So it does change the calculus a little bit if you do try to break up. And I want to say Denver did that a couple years ago too, although I don't think it drew as much attention because Denver was not in a like perilous state with.
Is that the move they made while they were playing in the finals?
It might have been while they were playing in the finals. Yeah, they kind of like disaggregated, I think, a further pick to get multiple. So anyway, but yeah, well, let's talk about the draft. I guess what's your the main question probably people want to know is, aside from who do we think they should pick, which I have no educated opinion on. Apologies. I'm too old. Like when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I researched who the Bucks brought in for second round workouts and tried to have opinions, which were mostly useless because, you're lucky if they pick one of those dudes. So I won't even try to say who they want, but I will say, I don't care really what position they pick.
No,
like need plays like no role in the second round for me. But probably the main question I will ask you is like, what is your sort of likelihood that you think the Bucks actually keep this pick or make a pick in the second round tomorrow night?
I think it's incredibly strong they make a pick in the second round. I don't have any insights either on scouting of these. That's Camille's category, and she talked with Rafael Barlow a week or so ago on some of those names. But yeah, I mean, I would assume either it's I do wonder if there's a way to move up, even if it's moving up in the second round, because I don't think this is going to benefit the Bucks at all. But you already mentioned it too, with Brooklyn controls 1/6 of the draft here, and that's kind of the model we're moving towards for the foreseeable future, where it really feels like all of the draft picks going forward are controlled by like 5 teams. You're not going to carry
then exactly, which is hard for them because like the Nets
you're not going to carry 5 rookies on.
They don't want it, right? Yeah. They don't want to bring 5 rookies in next year, even if they want to tank. Like this is just a pain in the ass to try to develop 5 guys with like no vets, etc. So you would expect at a minimum they would try to shift some of those into like future first or something like that.
Well, and I mean,
consolidate
to that point,
or
like what we just mentioned too with what Phoenix did. I mean, I wouldn't do it for like the 22nd pick or one of the lower ones that Brooklyn has. But if there is I would assume part of it, like you mentioned, is to basically use that as your free agency and also see if you can package like 2 or 3 of those better ones and move up even further in the first round. But if not, is there a way to turn your 2031 first into you get the 15th pick or whatever it is? I think 19 is what the Bucks' actual pick would have been, which Brooklyn owns. You get that and like 2 other first rounders in the near future for that pick. I mean, is that something in your mind that's more valuable than attaching to a contract to bring in another player?
It's a good question. I mean, like I'm kind of honestly scarred from how poor the Bucks' first round picks have generally been. So like
it's not really a bad thing to not have a first.
So like the idea of the best thing about the 2031 pick is like there's no illusion that the Bucks can waste it on a bad player anytime soon, right? So it's just sort of this like intangible thing. I mean, I think there's certainly, again, like you talk about time horizon. Yeah, I mean, we've been focusing on like how do you trade it for a player that can really help you win now. A rookie, obviously, you're not looking at them as like helping you win games next year, but especially if the Bucks are like, I don't know, if they can sell Giannis on this deal, like, hey, we're reloading. We've got young guys we like. We want to add more young guys we like so that, you've got help over the next few years, as you age, et cetera. Yeah, I don't know how much that appeals to Giannis. But certainly an alternative to just trying to trade for like a veteran would be, like we said, disaggregating it into like maybe it's a couple of first round picks this year. And you try to, make the Nets think like, oh, we can get this future pick that we can then try to, use to trade for Giannis, in a year or whatever it might be. So it'd be interesting, but I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. Like I think anecdotally, I've heard the Bucks really have not worked out like anybody in like a first round like range, which is not to say that they couldn't
Except for that one report from whatever dad it was that like, oh, the Bucks actually were asking about Mike. They didn't work him out, but interviewing
that was that Bryce. Was that
him.
Ron Harper who said that about Bright, his son?
Was it ever revealed who it was?
Oh, I don't know. I thought that was like the speculation. That was because that was at the time when the Spurs Bucks like, oh, Spurs going for Giannis type thing. So I don't know. I just like maybe that was just people.
It makes sense.
Presuming. I don't know. I just think it's. I mean, you got to have a lot of conviction. I think you'd have to have a lot of conviction about the guys that you were targeting, in order to make a move like that. But I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I was also going to say, like, is there something you could do with guys in the roster? But I mean, I think AJ is the only guy that has like first round pick value. Yeah. And I don't think they would trade AJ. I think with Andre, I think just him falling out of the rotation, I think probably means that I don't think there'd be. I mean, he may have like second. I think like if you told me that you could get like a second round pick for Andre, like I could see that. Getting a first round pick for him, it would really have to be some team that just like fell in love with him and probably like a late first. Which like at this point, like if I could get a late first for Andre, like I mean, I like the idea of Andre, but he's been a couple years now. Been here a couple years. He's still young, but he's not like a 20-year-old kid or something like that. And obviously, there's some clear limitations, especially with regard to his fit with Giannis. So, I would certainly recycle that into just like a fresh young player that you could have under contract control for a few years, but probably not. I would be surprised if something like that happened.
What's his wingspan? Because I mean, he's the prototypical player that John Hammond and the Magic would be interested in. So maybe you can with that.
I think he's only. That's a good question. Is Andre like
6'6"?
Yeah.
So I would assume like a 6'10" wingspan
6'11".
probably.
I don't know if that's enough. It would have to be like 7'3" to get Jeff Weltman to bite on that. I don't know. Can we? Is it? I think it's too late to do like a John Henson sign and trade. Larry Sanders. What's Larry Sanders up to? It's been a quiet few years for Larry.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've already seen the Celtics in the blink of an eye. Brad Stevens just gets him under the second apron. And the interesting part to like wrap it up with where we started in the Jrue trade too is I'm still surprised they didn't have to attach anything. I get your point too, as we were talking before recording. Well, they traded 2 of their 5 best players, but the Jrue contract and how long it extends and whether or not what we saw during the regular season is like, those are signs of decline with Jrue Holiday. I just assumed Boston was going to have to attach something like it was the inverse, how they got 2 second rounders with Anthony Simons. I assumed they would have to do that, but to not only not do that, to get an Anthony Simons, I'm curious if he stays there. He's a free agent or will be a free agent. Do you reroute him? Because given the age and the contract is less, I do think there's a stronger market for Anthony Simons than there is Jrue Holiday.
Yeah, I like I said, I think they got very good value in that move, just because I feel like most teams would look at Jrue's contract and just say like, like, like it's one thing to pay him $32 million next year, but then 34, 35, and then 37, whatever the specific dollars are. But to have 3 years remaining, given he's 34 going on 35, I think that's tough. And I realize I say that as a fan of a team that has Damian Lillard at the same age, currently on the shelf for rehabbing an Achilles tendon injury. So, but that honestly makes it like, I mean, I don't know, maybe on some level you could say, well, you're already like kind of screwed from like a aging guard perspective, like just double down further. But I would say probably for the Bucks, like having Dame currently in his position, on the one hand, you could use Jrue more, especially next year. But yeah, man, I mean, getting even older and putting even more like bad salary on the books, like it's really tough. So I'm, if you had offered me basically, because you could have done basically Jrue for Kuzma plus like, Livingston's contract. And I mean, I would have easily been able to talk myself into that just because it would have made next year, I think, more enjoyable than it currently projects to be. But part of me is like, and I think this is where you were coming out is like, man, I love you, Jrue, but like at that contract,
it's
like,
twice as much. Yeah, it's $105 million over the next 3 years when he's going to be 35, 36, and 37 on those contracts.
And being able to like, and again, I'm not going to sit here and say that like Gary Trent and Ryan Rollins and Kevin Porter Jr. are like, so much better than what Jrue Holiday would be over the next year or even 2 years. But you could literally get like all those guys for half of what Jrue Holiday makes.
Yeah.
And if you bring in, it's basically undoing the savings of the Middleton deal in a lot of ways, right? Because you're basically trading a guy in the mid 20 millions in Kuzma back for a guy who's making in the mid or low to mid 30s, which is where Jrue is, similar to where Chris was last year. So it just like basically takes away like a full sort of, salary slot that you would otherwise want to put towards one of those guys that, again, are they world?
I mean, it makes you a tax team.
Well, yeah. And my whole assumption this summer is that they're going to get out of the tax. Again, like, are they going to get out of the tax going into the season? Would they go into the season over the tax and then potentially move under? Would they stretch pat? Like they're kind of different levers there that they could look into. But my operating assumption when I fill out my spreadsheets is like the number at the end of the day, has to add up to south of the
187 or whatever it is. Yeah.
So that's also 187, 895 is the magic tax threshold number, which that's the other thing too, is like interesting, with teams like the Celtics and obviously the Bucks felt it a year ago. Like, I mean, as you said, like the cap tax aprons, they're going up 10% every year, basically. The second apron next year should be about $21 million more than it is this year. But, we've seen it, like, it's just, it can't grow fast enough in some cases, right? Like Boston is a good example, like especially with teams that have like rookies going into big extensions, which is where the Thunder are going to be, having Shea basically already on a big number, and then having both Chet and Jalen Williams go on to,
they're making 20 million combined this year.
So both of those guys going into like the 40s or whatever, they'd be getting like 40 million and change. And then Shea, he'll also eventually get the Supermax. Although I think, it was pointed out that like sneaky, brilliant move was Sam Presti getting Shea to sign for 5 years on his rookie max without an option, because otherwise I think he would be eligible for like $18-19 million more. He could opt out and get a huge pay raise in that 5th year, but he doesn't have that option. So he'll have to wait an extra year, which, I mean, that could be the difference between the Thunder, like winning another championship and having to break up the roster in a way that potentially could limit them from doing that, which, again, like I think everybody always jumps to every, it's happened basically every year for the last, really not the Toronto year because Kawhi left.
Yeah.
But, going into every year now, really since the Bucks,
this team's primed to win.
Like everybody looks at it is like, I guess they should be the favorites again because we just saw them win, and like all those teams have retained the kind of the core of their rosters of going back to Toronto, which didn't, but the Lakers, Bucks, Warrior, maybe not the Warriors so much, but certainly Boston and Denver, right? Like, I mean, until the late spring of 24, like everyone was saying like, oh, Denver's got to be the favorite, and like nobody can beat them late in games, and then they're out in the second round, and now it's like, like I don't know, like that weird comments today from Josh Kroenke about like maybe needing to trade you, which is such a bizarre, like why he ever would even suggest that was crazy, but anyway.
Is the least of the crazies that's happened with the Cronkies through the years. And that, I mean, everybody's favorite podcast too, earlier in the week, throwing out is this Thunder team best positioned in the history of sports to win now and in the future? You're like, we're we're just going to overlook the Edmonton Oilers winning 4 straight cups, or the Cowboys in the 90s and countless other
What about
dynasties.
the New York Islanders? The New York Islanders of the early
Islanders.
80s, Justin, the most underappreciated.
I mean, the Florida Panthers have won back-to-back cups and been in 3 straight cups too. So, but yeah, that's the interesting part is, I mean, you can't look at it any other way than say it's a 3-year window for every single team. And this is year 2 for the Thunder. We just mentioned the contract situations and the raises that are going to be due to some of those guys, but also to get back to that Nets point with 5 first-round picks, the Thunder have 15 guys under contract next season already too. So eventually you're going to have to start breaking up that team. So it's just an every year thing. And also the last thing I'll say is I think it's 2029 that you can opt out of the CBA. I wonder if we start to see anything going into like 27, 28, where teams are getting the sense of, we're opting out of this thing because we're not pleased with how it's gone. And we're loading up thinking that these things are going to be reduced, and let's shift how we're building teams.
It's interesting because I think everybody's assumption has always been with the Thunder that they would use all those assets to just like add, another superstar.
Yeah.
But first off, you can only really do that if you're getting rid of one of the guys who's going to make one of the max slots, right? One of your top 3 guys. And then I think the more realistic outcome probably is that it's almost like they, because like Caruso is going to be making $20 million a year.
Yeah.
In his early 30s. I feel like probably the more likely scenario is that you're basically swapping out,
Caruso's
the Hartensteins. Exactly. Yeah. Like you're basically recycling those guys into slightly lower paid versions. Like basically they can go and cherry pick the underpaid veteran type guys.
Yeah.
Or they could potentially obviously consolidate, try to target some guys in the draft. I mean, they can continue to make draft picks every year and just see if they strike it rich. But it's much more about allowing them to reload in a flexible way and kind of maintain depth than it is just like getting like a superstar, because I would be surprised if they add a superstar to replace either Jalen, Chet, and obviously they're not going to do that with Shea. Like, and that was always the part, like, like with any sort of like hypothetical Giannis discussion over the last year, it was like, well, you kind of like almost have to give up definitely one of Jalen and Chet and then another like really huge salary slot, because otherwise like you can't really, you can't afford to keep Giannis plus all of your existing top 3. Like there's no money to do that without paying $500 million in Oklahoma City for, like a payroll, which is just, I know they've spent the money in the past, but not that kind of money. And I don't know any team that's going to do that for more than maybe 1 year. Right. Maybe a team like the Knicks could, but it's hard to even get to that point. That's like a great problem to have, but yeah.
And this is the true last thing I'll say about it. That's the one thing too that always gave me pause about, anybody projecting this is the package for Giannis. And you and I have talked about this before too, when people would bring up the Spurs. I just like, Giannis has an ego too. And I don't see Giannis saying, I'm going to go team up with Wemby and I'm going to jump on Victor Wembanyama's team. And that's where it starts to be the challenge, is like, okay, where's the fit? Because Giannis isn't going to another team to be the 1B to a 1A. And I don't know what the team is out there. I guess Houston was the best scenario in terms of having pieces around him where you come in and you're the star. But as days go by, there are just less and less of those teams that are out there. And I think we've seen more and more to realize, like, if you're joining another star, those are the scenarios that just don't work in the CBA.
Yeah. We'll see. By the way, I'm just some news here. Jake Fisher, not real news, but Jake Fisher just said the Kings may be looking to give Dennis Schroeder a full mid-level deal, which really puts the kibosh on maybe get him for the taxpayer mid-level to be your starting guard. So, hey, Kevin Porter Jr. and Ryan Rollins, come on back, friends. But anyway, we'll see. We'll have a lot more time to talk about free agency.
And Kyrie Irving is declining his player option, has agreed to a new deal with the Mavs, so take him off the board for the Bucks as well. Ryan Rollins and Jericho Sims, it's been eerily quiet on that front for the Bucks. I think we've heard murmurs for every other guy and their interest in guys like Gary Trent Jr. I think there's this assumption they're going to retain Jericho Sims. But it's been quiet, and the deeper it gets into it, the more you start to feel uneasy is the wrong word, but like, I wonder if they're going to be able to retain Ryan Rollins.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the mock off season that the Dunked On guys did, he was kind of like a late. I think it was like they had New Orleans like throwing him an offer. So, I can't remember what the number was, but it was kind of like one of those musical chair things at the end where it's like, oh, we need a point guard, like, oh, Ryan Rollins, maybe make him an offer. And I would say the Dunked On guys, like I think Pelton was doing the Bucks, like he seemed to really be fixated on like, oh, the Bucks want to bring back Kevin Porter Jr., which I don't know that they would prefer to bring back.
I mean, they do, but yeah, I've long assumed Gary Trent Jr. is their number one priority.
Yeah. And I honestly don't even know, like, if given the choice between Rollins and KPJ, I don't know, like, which of those guys the Bucks would prefer. I mean, the Bucks obviously, like, went out and got Rollins and gave him a chance, and like he played hurt last year with the shoulder injury, and obviously it was very good for them. KPJ, as you pointed out, like they were pretty close to getting him a year ago and then traded for him. So obviously there's like, it's not like he was like just some random dude that they like brought in. So yeah, I mean, I think in the grand scheme of the universe, I think you'd like to have both guys back, but I think, with no Damian Lillard for the vast majority of the season, I think you need 3 ball handlers, at least. And I'm not including Giannis, although he'll be the primary guy when he's playing. But I think you want like at least 3 guys that you can squint at and say like, okay, that's like a point guardish type guy. And, both those guys fit that quantity. But, if one of those guys is hurt, then like suddenly it's like, oh, who's going to play point guard for us? Like who's going to eat minutes, like as a initiator to like bring the ball up at least,
Well, we already said Pat Connaughton opted into his deal. So.
There you go. Point Pat.
Should start to get really interesting here for the Bucks as we have approached day 1 of the 2-day NBA draft, and already starting to see a lot of moves trickling out there. That'll do it for today's show. For Frank, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.